Does the state you live in really matter when it comes to child custody? Well, the answer is both yes and no. It's very complex and quite often misleading. Many states currently have 50-50 shared parenting laws, where the judge is supposed to grant equal time to both parents unless there is child abuse, domestic violence issues, drugs, and other factors that can put the child at risk. But there are other factors that are considered as well. If your child is school-aged and you live an hour away, it would be physically impossible for you to take care of your child and be able to get the children to school, their sports programs, band practice, or whatever extracurricular program they are into. As a working parent, being there is half the battle. I once saw a case where a fireman was denied 50-50 custody of his child because of his job. As a fireman, you are on call. He could get a phone call in the middle of the night and have to leave his small children all alone. The judge took this into consideration when determining the safety and well-being of the child. While I don't necessarily agree with the judge's decision, especially if the grandparents could have taken the children, the judge's decision was still a rational decision if the fireman didn't raise the issue of other family members taking care of the children. And again, this was in a state with 50-50 parenting laws. In the US, according to a 2018 study, mothers were awarded 65% of custodial time with their children compared to 35% of custodial time for fathers, even with these 50-50 shared parenting laws in place. Doesn't seem fair, does it? Some judicial decisions are made rationally, but most decisions are still made with the unconstitutional tender years doctrine mentality, where mothers are the natural caretakers of the children and fathers are merely the piggy bank. Keep in mind, as I've talked about in other videos, the mother-centric model is rooted in feminism, which is rooted in communism. The end goal for these people is to destroy the family to institute a one-world communist government. Now back to that 2018 study for a moment. Tennessee was the worst state in the union, giving biological fathers only 21.8% custodial time. If you are a father, I don't recommend moving to Tennessee, and I will talk more about that in a minute. But living in a state that has 50-50 custody provisions makes things somewhat easier for fathers than states that don't. However, even in those states, judges have judicial discretion to deviate from the statute and frequently do. So, right now, some of you are probably scratching your head thinking, fathers are getting a 35% share of custody time, but I am only getting 2 weekends a month and 1 week during the summer. That's only 15% of the time. What happened to my 50-50 split? First off, I want to reiterate, 50-50 shared parenting laws are not a guarantee. There are many variables involved, as I previously mentioned earlier, and while not codified, there is still a father bias in the courts. Many fathers have to jump through hoops in order to get 50-50 custody, while the mother only has to say, "Yes, I gave birth to the child." And I do want to critique that 2018 custody study for a moment. The reality of those statistics is even worse. Not only does it not take into consideration the thousands of dollars in legal fees the father had to pay, and all the allegations he fought off to get to 50-50, but it appears to include custody cases where both parents agreed to equally divide the time between them amicably. Yes, that scenario does exist, and we really should be putting those mothers up on a pedestal and celebrating them instead of paying any attention to the OnlyFans thoughts, the welfare queens, and the narcissistic drama mamas. When only taking into consideration custody battles that are contested by the mother who is pushing for sole custody or limiting the father to just weekends, even in 50-50 states, the mother is getting primary residence closer to 80% of the time. So what gives? A couple more stats I want to throw out there is that 40% of all children born in the US today are born out of wedlock, and women between the ages of 18 and 29 were more likely to cheat on their partner than men. When paternity is in question, it starts muddying up the waters in a potential custody battle. Quite often what happens is, the woman gets pregnant and then breaks up with her boyfriend, never telling him she is pregnant. When the woman gives birth, she doesn't add a father's name to the birth certificate and may not even be sure who the father is. There are roughly 300,000 paternity tests run in the US each year, with 30% of the results showing as not the father. She has the child she wanted without having to co-parent with someone she was only sexually attracted to. But 2 years later she applies for welfare and names the father on the application. By the time the father is tracked down, completes court-ordered paternity tests in order to put him on child support, the child is already 3 years old, and probably was calling 2 other men daddy during that time, as the revolving door of potential stepfathers keeps spinning. Keep in mind, the mother has had sole custody for 3 years now because neither you or the child even knew the other one existed. At the moment, you live 45 minutes away and have no rights to the child. Unless you are planning on moving to within 20 minutes from the mother, 50-50 shared custody just won't work. By the time the child is school-aged, there is no way possible for you to get the child to and from school with that much of a distance, and courts are likely to frown upon you trying to attempt it. In my own custody battle, the courts were going to allow my ex-wife to move over an hour away with our child, and for me to get 50-50 custody, I had to also move to within a reasonable distance from where my ex would be living. Keep in mind, my child was already established in a school, and the courts were allowing my ex to move her away and disrupt her life, even in a state with 50-50 shared custody laws. 2 months after moving, my ex starts yelling at me that I wasn't supposed to move too. This is because our salaries were roughly the same, so no child support was ordered. She was pissed. So, when I hear fathers start celebrating because of a new shared parenting law in their state, I let them know, it's not that simple. Family court judges rarely follow the law. They are some of the most corrupt judges in the court system. Everyone knows that 50-50 shared custody between 2 loving parents that are actively involved with their child's life is the best for the child. But you have to understand that you need to be actively involved. The problem is often decades of psychological conditioning that the mothers always get the kids and the father always pays child support. Many women actively engage in character assassination and create false claims of rape, domestic violence, and child abuse in order for you, her personal ATM, to give her money. This is all while saying she is a strong, independent woman who doesn't need a man. As I mentioned in my Dirty Tricks video, domestic violence centers will likely coach her how to talk to the police and to the judge so that she can get you out of the child's life. When I was court watching several domestic violence cases, I would see the attorney or the primary advocate of the domestic violence center sit in the courtroom on the side of the party they wanted to win, and even nod to the judge so the judge knew they were there and which side to favor in the court order. It's corrupt as hell. Of course, there will be times when the judge can't look the other way because the 800-pound gorilla in the room is staring right back at him, and they have to keep up a certain quota to make it look like the father bias isn't so extreme. Nationally, fathers are only granted custody 18.3% of the time. So when your ex falsely accuses you of domestic violence or child abuse as a method to gain the upper hand in the custody battle, what can you do? In many states, all you can do is provide evidence to the contrary and hope that the judge will allow you to submit it. It doesn't always happen. I have seen cases where the judge flat out refused to allow exculpatory evidence, or the evidence against them wasn't turned over to the defendant as discovery. Now, even if you can prove your innocence, do you think your ex will be punished? Not likely. Because in many states, as long as the woman makes the claim in good faith, the mother cannot be punished. Trying to prove it was in bad faith is even more difficult. You will be seen as vindictive yourself and not having the capacity to co-parent. But it's not possible to co-parent with someone who is essentially extorting money from you and using the child as a weapon. Let's get back to Tennessee for a moment. From earlier, Tennessee was the worst state for fathers' rights in the country, with only 21.8% visitation for fathers. But as of this year, Tennessee enacted a 50-50 custody presumption law, but at the same time, created another law making it almost impossible to punish someone who makes false allegations of domestic violence or child abuse. Prior to this law, making false allegations was a criminal offense with the possibility of jail time. I will be curious to see if both domestic violence allegations increase in the state, as well as father's custodial time with the child decreases, since both of these laws will likely cancel each other out. Listen, these 50-50 custody presumption laws are far from over, fellas. The best way to avoid these issues is to choose your mate wisely. Take your time before getting sexually intimate, avoid single mothers, avoid welfare queens, and if she starts saying, "I need a man who," well, fill in the blank with any ridiculous requirement she decides to add in, you need to run like hell. If you are currently in a custody battle and are pushing for 50-50 custody, make sure you are within 20 minutes drive to the child's school. If you can't pick up the child immediately after school, get your child into an after-school program or daycare until you can pick them up. If the grandparents can help, make sure you have a plan in place. Please check out my video on the best interest of the child standard and make sure to document everything, and whatever you do, limit your contact with the mother. She will often try to provoke you in order to get you to say or do something you might regret. Don't give her that power over you. Well guys, again, stay strong, stay safe, and stay vigilant. On to the next video.